The storm arrived faster than any forecast had warned, turning the sky white and the world silent beneath screaming wind. The woman had lived alone in the wilderness long enough to recognize danger, but this storm felt different, heavier, sharper. Alive, the cabin walls groaned as snow slammed against them, piling high enough to block windows and swallow sound. The temperature dropped with ruthless speed, frost crawling across the glass, breath turning to mist the moment it left her lips, moved quickly, securing the door, feeding the fire, rationing fuel, knowing the night would be long and unforgiving. Outside, the forest vanished behind curtains of ice trees, bending shadows, twisting like watching shapes. The wind howled in waves, rising and falling like something searching for weakness. The cabin was small but sturdy, yet even so the cold found every crack, every seam, every breath as darkness settled. The storm intensified, stealing all sense of time. The woman wrapped herself tighter, listening, counting heartbeats, measuring the fire, watching it shrink, knowing every piece of fuel burned now might mean survival later. The silence between gusts was worse than the noise, thick and expectant, as if the wilderness itself waited. Then she heard it at first. She thought it was the wind playing tricks, a sound too faint, too fragile, but it came again, cutting through the storm, thin and desperate. A cry, not human, not animal, but unmistakably alive. It faded, then returned, weaker, closer. Pulse quickened, instinct screaming to stay inside to survive, but another instinct, older, deeper, refused to let the sound be ignored. She grabbed a coat, forced the door open, and was nearly thrown back by the storm. Snow rushed in, biting her skin, blinding her eyes. She stepped out anyway, following the sound, guided only by instinct and stubborn resolve. Shapes emerged from the white, small, huddled, shaking, barely visible against the snow. 20 cubs pressed together, fur stiff with ice bodies, weak from cold. Their cries faltered as she approached, fear mixing with exhaustion. For one frozen second, she stood there, understanding the risk, the cost. The certainty that letting them in might mean none of them survived. Then she knelt, gathered the nearest cub into her arms, and turned back toward the cabin, choosing without hesitation. As the storm raged louder around her, the cubs were lighter than she expected, fragile bundles of shivering fur and fading warmth. Their bodies trembled violently, teeth chattering, eyes dull with exhaustion. She moved fast, scooping them up 2 at a time, cradling them against her chest as the storm clawed at her back. The wind fought every step, snow filling her boots, burning her skin, stealing breath with every gustach. Trip felt longer than the last, the distance between the cubs and the cabin stretching as if the world itself resisted her choice. Her arms ached, her lungs screamed, yet she did not stop, not when her fingers went numb, not when her legs shook beneath her weight. The cries softened as they were carried inside, replaced by weak breaths and faint movements inside the cabin. Chaos followed. Heat rushed out as she opened the door again and again, precious warmth, lost to the storm. She laid the cubs near the fire, wrapping them in blankets, coats, spare clothes, anything that could hold heat. She rubbed frozen limbs, coaxing life back with gentle hands, murmuring soothing sounds. She barely realized she was making the cubs pressed closer, instinctively seeking warmth, trust forming quickly in the face of survival. Some curled against her legs, others clung to her sleeves, tiny claws gripping fabric as if afraid to be left behind again. Their eyes followed her every movement, fear slowly giving way to fragile hope. The storm outside roared louder. Angered perhaps by her defiance, the cabin shook but held. She fed the fire sparingly, balancing survival and sacrifice, knowing the fuel would not last forever. The night stretched endlessly, and exhaustion threatened to pull her under, yet every time she faltered, a small sound, a shifting weight, a quiet breath pulled her back. She stayed awake, tending them one by one, counting breaths, checking warmth, feeling life slowly return to small bodies that should not have survived the night. Unseen beyond the walls, tracks formed in the snow. Something powerful was coming home. The night deepened and the storm showed no mercy. Wind slamming into the cabin like waves against stone. The woman sat on the floor, back against the wall, cubs piled around her, seeking warmth, their small bodies rising and falling in uneven rhythm. She barely felt her legs anymore, numb from cold and stillness, yet she did not move, afraid to disturb them, afraid that breaking contact might steal the heat they had fought so hard to regain. One cub whimpered in its sleep, and she adjusted the blanket, instinctively drawing it closer. Another nudged her hand, and she curled her fingers gently around its back, feeling the slow return of warmth beneath matted fur. Each small sign of life felt like a victory earned moment by moment against the cold. She fed the fire again, watching the fuel drop lower than she liked, calculating hours in her head. Dawn felt Impossibly far away, the walls creaked under the weight of snow and ice building outside, and every sound made her wonder if the cabin would hold. Until morning her eyes burned with exhaustion, but every time they threatened to close she forced them open, listening, counting breaths, memorizing the sound of life around her. The cubs trusted her completely now, fear replaced by instinctive reliance. Their bodies pressed close, forming a living circle of heat, and quiet strength outside the storm began to shift, the wind changing pitch, the forest groaning under the strain. Somewhere beyond the white chaos something moved, heavy, deliberate, powerful. Tracks pressed deep into the snow, following the fading trail of the cub scent, cutting through the storm with purpose. The woman felt it before she heard it, a pressure in the air, a weight that made her spine straighten. Her instincts whispered danger, yet she did not rise or reach for anything. She stayed where she was, arms wrapped around the cubs, forming a barrier without thought. A distant sound echoed through the storm. Not wind, not thunder, but a call, low and resonant, filled with urgency and restrained fury. It faded, then returned closer. This time the cubs stirred, responding instinctively, then settled again, pressing tighter against her. The woman swallowed, steadying her breath. Something was coming, and whatever it was would not be ignored. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin. As the storm slowly lost its rage, the woman shifted carefully, stretching numb limbs without disturbing the cubs. Their bodies were warmer now, breaths deeper, more steady than before. She allowed herself a small breath of relief, knowing they had survived the worst of the night outside. The wind dropped to a low moan, snow settling heavy and quiet. The silence felt unnatural after hours of chaos. Every sound inside the cabin suddenly loud in comparison, the crackle of embers, the soft rustle of fur, the slow rhythm of breathing. Then, the sound came again, closer than before, a deep resonance that vibrated through the ground and into her chest. The cubs stirred, lifting their heads, eyes opening wide, ears turning toward the door. Recognition passed through them like a current. Some whimpered softly, others pressed harder against her side. She rose slowly, positioning herself between the cubs and the door, heart pounding not from fear but from certainty. Whatever waited outside was powerful and desperate. The door shuddered slightly. Under a careful weight, not an attack but a test of presence and strength, frost drifted down from the ceiling as something circled the cabin steps. Heavy, controlled, unmistakably deliberate. The woman did not reach for a weapon. There was none worth using. She placed one hand on the door and stood her ground, breath steady, shoulders squared. The cubs huddled behind her, eyes fixed on the door, trusting her without question. The fire crackled once, then settled the cabin, holding its breath outside. The presence stopped directly in front of the door. Heat met cold, life met instinct. The moment stretched thin as ice. Neither side yielded. The woman opened the door just enough to let light spill onto the snow. Two massive eyes met hers, glowing, fierce and alive. The Alpha had found them. The Alpha stood motionless, framed by snow and dawn, its massive form towering over the cabin, yet held in check by something deeper than instinct. Its breath rolled out in heavy clouds, eyes fixed not on the woman but on the cubs peering from behind her legs. The woman did not step back. She did not raise her hands. She stayed exactly where she was, body squared, heart steady. For a long moment no one moved. The storm had passed, leaving only silence and the soft sound of life returning. The cubs whimpered, then quieted, recognizing the presence that had haunted their dreams. The Alpha lowered its head slightly, scenting the air, reading the truth written in warmth and survival. The woman shifted just enough to reveal the cubs unharmed, wrapped, fed, alive. Her posture did not change. She was a barrier, and a promise. That Alpha stepped forward one pace, then stopped, its claws sinking into the snow. Power rolled off it, heavy and absolute, yet restrained. The cubs pressed against the woman, refusing to move, and the Alpha saw it. Trust earned, not forced. A low sound rumbled from its chest, not anger, not threat, but acknowledgement. The wilderness itself seemed to listen. The woman met the Alpha's gaze unblinking. The night had chosen sides, and so had the cubs. The Alpha circled the cabin slowly, massive paws crunching into snow, the weight of its presence making the ground tremble. The cubs huddled closer to the woman, instinctively seeking protection and warmth. She did not flinch, not a step back, not a gesture of fear. Her eyes never left the Alpha, yet there was no challenge, only calm acceptance, a barrier built of courage and certainty. The wind had died, leaving the world silent except for the soft crackle of the fire, and the faint shuffling of cubs as they adjusted against her legs. The Alpha paused, watching every movement, analyzing every breath, the rise and fall of her chest. the gentle sweep of hands over the cub's fur, its glowing eyes narrowed slightly, not in threat but in curiosity and calculation. It came closer, one deliberate step then another, until the tip of its massive muzzle was mere inches from the cabin threshold. The cubs whimpered softly at the proximity, yet did not flee. They trusted her implicitly, and the alpha sensed it, understanding forming in a way that could not be taught. The woman extended a hand, slowly, not to touch, not to provoke, but to show presence and protection. The alpha tilted its head, studying her gesture, its body tense, muscles coiled ready for instinctive action, but something held it back, something it did not fully understand yet respected. Minutes passed like hours, the world around them frozen in fragile stillness. The cubs shifted slightly, relaxing into her warmth, and the alpha finally lowered its massive head, bringing its muzzle to the ground in a gesture unfamiliar yet deliberate, signaling acknowledgement and restraint. Then it stepped back, one slow, measured pace, its eyes never leaving hers as it circled the cabin again. Ensuring the cubs were unharmed, the woman remained where she was, arms protectively around the cubs, letting the moment settle, letting trust solidify in silence. Finally, the alpha sat back on its haunches, a low rumble vibrating in its chest, more rumble than growl, more acknowledgement than warning. The cubs sniffed the air cautiously, then relaxed, fully recognizing the bond formed by courage, sacrifice, and unwavering protection. The storm had passed, the night had tested them all, and the alpha had decided the human was worthy, the cubs were safe, the cabin was guarded, and loyalty had been earned, not by force, but by heart. The alpha lowered itself fully to the ground, massive body folding in on powerful limbs, its eyes still fixed on the woman. And the cubs pressed closer, instinctively sensing the shift. The air heavy with recognition and respect. The woman did not move, letting them decide, letting the trust she had earned solidify in silence. The storm had left the world frozen and quiet, but the heat of life radiated inside the cabin. The cubs shifted, curling tighter against her legs, tiny claws scratching lightly, yet without fear. Their eyes tracked every movement, every blink, every breath of the alpha, waiting for signs of danger and finding none. The alpha circled once, then twice, slow, deliberate movements, testing boundaries and safety. Its breath fogged in the cold air, muscles coiled, yet relaxed. Now calculating and acknowledging the choice the human had made. Its low rumble vibrated through the floor, a sound felt as much as heard, signaling acceptance and vigilance. The woman reached down carefully, brushing fingers through the fur of the nearest cub, her movements calm, steady, measured. The cubs leaned into her touch, nudging against her hands and arms as if offering thanks and recognition. The alpha paused mid-circle, watching the exchange. Understanding passing through, instincts older than language. Outside the cabin, the wind shifted, the forest quieted, the world holding its breath, waiting for the final act. The alpha lowered its massive head to the snow, one long moment, lingering in thought and tide choice. Then it straightened its back and exhaled slowly, a signal to the cubs, a signal to the woman. The bond was sealed, not by force, not by words, but by courage, compassion, and unwavering presence. The alpha had chosen, and the cubs followed instinctively. The human had become their protector, their chosen guardian, and the wilderness itself seemed to honor the decision. The alpha stepped back just enough to allow the cubs freedom, yet remained close enough that no harm could come to them. The cubs hesitated a moment, then moved to the woman, pressing against her legs, tails brushing the floor there, eyes bright with trust and recognition. She bent down, brushing each one with gentle hands, murmuring soft sounds of comfort that carried through the cabin. Outside, the storm had completely passed. The air was crisp, sharp, and still. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if it too were watching the moment unfold. The alpha settled at the edge of the cabin, its massive form relaxed yet alert, muscles coiled, ready to act, yet restrained by recognition of the human's strength and courage. The cubs shifted, curling tighter against her, their tiny bodies moving instinctively to her warmth. The woman remained calm, letting the cubs decide how close to stay, and letting the alpha witness every movement, every choice, every sign of trust forming silently between them. The alpha lowered its head, briefly signaling approval, a slow, deliberate movement that the cubs understood immediately. They settled fully against her legs, stretching paws over blankets, nudging for warmth and attention. The alpha's eyes never left the woman, silently acknowledging that she had earned not only the cub's trust but its own respect and loyalty. The cabin seemed smaller, somehow more alive, filled with life and presence that no storm could erase. The human's quiet courage had bridged the divide, instinct had bowed to choice, and the wilderness itself seemed to whisper a lesson of trust, sacrifice, and protection. The alpha had chosen, the cubs had chosen, and the human stood at the center of it all, calm, steady, unyielding. The night's trials had ended, and the bond was eternal. The storm had passed, completely leaving the forest crisp, quiet, and bathed in pale light. The woman sat on the floor surrounded by the cubs, their small bodies warm and alive, breathing. Slowly and steadily the alpha remained outside at the edge of the clearing, its massive form calm yet alert, eyes never leaving her or the cubs. The bond had been tested, forged in night, wind, and frost, and now it held stronger than fear or Cubs stirred, stretching tiny limbs, yawning and blinking up at her, their trust absolute. They nudged against her hands, curling into her lap and legs, seeking warmth and comfort. She moved among them, her fingers brushing fur, murmuring soft sounds. They understood instinctively she had earned their lives, and in return, they had given her loyalty and affection, unreserved and complete. The alpha shifted slightly, lowering its head closer to the cabin threshold, a gesture of full acknowledgement. The cubs followed her gaze, instinctively recognizing the signal. They did not approach, yet they did not flee. Their trust mirrored hers, a reflection of the bond that had been built over one long night. The woman rose carefully, keeping her movements slow, calm, and deliberate. She stepped outside the cabin onto the snow, crunching softly beneath her boots. The alpha did not move away. Instead, it bowed slightly, lowering its massive head in a gesture of respect and acceptance. It had chosen her, and her courage had proven greater than fear, greater than brute strength. The cubs clustered around her legs, their small bodies warm and alive. The alpha sat nearby, vigilant but unthreatening. The storm had ended, the night had tested them all, and every heart present understood the lesson: courage protects, compassion earns respect, and choice can forge loyalty where instinct alone cannot. The woman looked at the cubs, then at the alpha, knowing she would never be alone again. The wilderness had remembered her, and the bond was eternal.